This is Edward October, host of Octoberpod on YouTube. Hear that jingle jingle? It could be Kris Kringle, or a home invader looking for an open window, a jilted lover looking for revenge, or a disgruntled coworker hoping to spike your eggnog with arsenic. The girls of our true crime podcast are always on Santa's nice list, but the crimes they discuss are very naughty indeed. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how are ya?
I'm pretty darn good. How are you?
I'm in that Christmas spirit.
Hear that jingle jingle?
That's the sound of Kris Kringle.
It is. That's
It
right.
is.
Exactly. Yep.
Only a few days away.
That is correct.
I'm sorry you're getting cold again this year. I told you to be better.
No, that's all I ever get.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I
That's
know.
okay, though. Whatever. Well, today we are at, drum roll, please, day 11. Only have 1 day left.
Can't believe it's flown by.
It's a year.
This whole
it's
year's-
flown by, has it not?
Has, totally. But like the 12 days of Christmas has totally, it was like a blink of the eye. And bam, it's gone.
I wouldn't say that so much. But
I
here
would.
we are.
There we are. Are you ready? Let's go.
I'm so ready. Ready?
Yep.
The year is 1958, and America is still innocent in terms of evil people, or the evil people we know about today. We know that they were always around, but with snail mail and no internet, things that made the news are not like they are today. Someone commits a heinous crime in Manchester, England, and in mere seconds, we here in the United States hear about it. Today's case, Day 11, takes us back to when Eisenhower and Nixon led the U.S., and the FBI, led by your dad's buddy, J. Edgar Hoover, was America's watchdog. Even though it entered the lexicon in early 1900s, the word teenager was just coming into the common language. Teens were becoming more independent from their parents, thanks to public education. No longer were young children pulled from school to go to work, out in the fields. This led to some rebellion from those teens, and who better to show that cause than James Dean and Elvis the Pelvis, Elvis Presley. Perhaps it was perfect timing in the U.S., or perhaps it was the shock of how two teenagers could capture the world's attention and go down in infamy. The couple would be memorialized in such movie classics as Terrance Malik's 1974 Badlands, with Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek as the lead roles, or Quentin Tarantino's True Romance, David Lynch's Wild at Heart, or Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. Even today, the couple still holds our gaze with movies, TV shows, songs, books, and more. You know who we're talking about here?
No.
Charles Starkweather embodied the cool
yes,
teen
Charles. Yes.
with his slick back hair and his cuffed up jeans and cowboy boots. But most of them around him saw him much differently. More of a
Badlands.
lost soul who would amount to nothing in life, but he was determined to prove them wrong. Maybe Charles would not have turned to crime if he did not have a girl by his side by the name of Caril Fugate. Charles was 18 years old when he met 13-year-old Caril. This clandestine meeting would change the course of many lives. The two had been introduced through Charles' friend, Bob Van Bush, who was dating Barbara Fugate at the time. Charlie eventually became interested in Barbara's younger sister, Caril, who had just turned 13. Boy, did she look 13, too. She looked like a little girl.
Playing with the cord to my microphone, so let me get
And he's going to chew it in half. And it's going to be the cat from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Maybe it wouldn't be the first cat that did that.
The four of them double dated on a steady basis despite Caril's youth. Caril was a pretty girl with dark brown hair. Now, she too struggled with school and had been held back in grade school, but Charles adored her, and he treated her very well. She was good for Charles's self-esteem, since her young eyes looked at him like he walked on water. Ah, young love. Young, dumb love. Guy and Helen Starkweather would give birth to Charles Raymond Starkweather on November 24th, 1938, in Lincoln, Nebraska. Charles was the third child born out of 7. Now, Charles was born with what we call bow legs, where the middle of your legs kind of bow out. The family were hard workers, but they really did struggle to make ends meet. As Charles grew older, he struggled in school, and he had developed a speech impediment, which he was often bullied about. It was here his rage started to surface, and he became the bully. For some reason, the fact that he desperately needed glasses, this kind of cracked me up, escaped all the educators. And because of this, he was labeled a slow learner. So they labeled this poor kid, a learning disabled kid, when in reality, he just needed glasses. Like he had really poor eyesight and nobody noticed. What? Different times. At age 16, Charles would drop out of school and his parents were getting tired of his constant fighting and violence towards others. Charles then went to work at Western Newspaper Union Warehouse, unloading trucks. Now, Charles was not very good at his job, but Charles liked the fact, this is really the only reason he took the job, was that the warehouse was close to Caril's school, meaning they could see each other every day.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
What was the age difference?
He was 18, she was 13.
Yeah.
Now, when they go, she goes up to 14 and he's 19 whenever they start.
For some reason, I always thought he was like in early 20s.
It's still like an 18-year-old and the 13-year-old. That's like a senior in high school versus and dating a 7th grader.
I know. It's so wrong. It's gross.
After an explosive fight with his father, he was kicked out and told to go elsewhere, where he moved into a rooming house with his friend Bob and Barbara Fugate lived. Charles quit his job at the warehouse and took a job as a garbage man, mostly because he could be off work when Caril was off school. He didn't make hardly any money and often couldn't even pay the rent. It was here that Charles began to dream up ways to get out of his situation, such as robbing banks. He was bitter and angry that others were above him in the system. Now, this fascination led him to realize that death was the great equalizer, stating, quote, "Dead people are all on the same level." And so his life of crime started, and it started by getting back at all those who had done him wrong. On November 30th, 1957, Starkweather tried to purchase a stuffed puppy dog, a little stuffed animal, for Caril from a local gas station. He didn't have cash, so he wanted to put the toy on credit. They used to do that. The station attendant, 21-year-old Robert Colbert, refused. Charles was furious, and he would get revenge on the married man with a baby on the way. December 1st, 1957, Charles drove to that gas station with a 12-gauge shotgun that he took from his friend's cousin. Once at the gas station, he found Robert working on a vehicle. Charles bought a pack of smokes. That's what he called them in here, so I had put that pack of cigarettes for you youngins out there. Bought a pack of smokes and then left, only to turn around minutes later to enter the store and then purchase a pack of gum. I'm guessing he's trying to get up his nerve to do what he came to do. He got in his car and he drove off yet again. This time, Charles would park nearby, put on a hat, and tie a bandana over part of his face and go back to the gas station. Charles would rob the man, stealing only what was in the cash drawer. Charles then forced young Robert into the car and made him drive them out of town. Once there, they got out of the car, and Robert struggled to get the gun from Charles. The gun fired, and Robert was injured. Once on the ground, Charles would shoot him again in the head. The first killing made Charles feel something he had longed for: power. The killing didn't faze him. In fact, he liked it. He really liked it. Charles tried to lie to Caril at first, claiming that although he robbed the gas station, he did not kill Robert. She didn't believe him. By sharing this information, the two of them were now bonded together, and this team would go on to commit even more murders. Caril's family were less than happy that she was dating the much older Charles, and they tried desperately to get the two to separate. Now, the cause for concern was growing as the young girl had gained a bit of weight, and they were scared she was carrying Charles's baby. They thought for sure that he had gotten her pregnant. What would unfold next remains a little bit unclear. The only two who could say what happened that day had vastly different stories. Caril would say that she broke up with Charles prior to this, and that is why he was so upset. Charles would deny this. If you're going to commit a crime, how many times have we said if you're going to commit a crime, it's got to just be you and you alone?
Exactly.
It was Tuesday, January 21st, 1958. Charles drove over to Caril's house with a .22 rifle in hand. Charles went to the door, and Caril's mom, Velda Barrett, came to the door. According to Charles, he had went over to the house to go hunting with Caril's father, Marion, but when he got there, Velda told Charles that they did not want their daughter to date Charles anymore. After this, a fight erupted between the mother and Charles. Charles then said he left the house, leaving the gun behind, and he went for a drive to cool off. A bit later, he came back to the home to get his gun, but then Marion kicked him out. After leaving the residence, Charles said that he went to a payphone where he called Marion's employer, think about this, and told them that Marion was going to be sick for the next several days.
That works.
Several days. Charles then went back to the house where he waited for Caril to get home from school. When she arrived home, the two talked, and Caril then went inside and got into an argument with her mother. Charles was behind her. Charles then said that Velda began hitting him and screaming at him for getting Caril pregnant. As the two were struggling, and you're going to notice this happens a lot, Marion came into the room with the hammer in his hand. At this point, Charles took his gun and shot Marion in the head. That's Caril's dad. Charles then claimed that Velda came after him with the knife, and so he shot her in the face. He then started ramming the butt of the rifle into Velma's head as she was trying to get the baby, the little baby that, Caril's youngest sibling was a toddler.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't not like him already, he also hit the baby with the butt of the rifle, hit the baby in the head.
Oh, such a sweet man.
Caril's mother, Velda's body, was taken out to the outhouse, and that's where he stored it, okay? Caril's little sister was out.
He stored the body in the outhouse? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Caril's little sister, who he killed, was also taken out to the outhouse. Caril's father's body was dumped in the chicken coop, which is interesting, but we'll talk about that, how he took them out from the house. So we'll get to that in a minute. After the murders were completed, Charles and Caril cleaned up the mess and then spent the next several days inside the home with a sign on the door instructing visitors to stay away as the house had been struck by the flu, complete with poor spelling. Now, let me just say, you just know that she's young and neither of them are very smart.
Right.
So here's the note. Stay away, every, with the big E, body is sick with the flu, F-L-U-E. Flu. After a few days, her family's outside, rotting, and they're just hanging out in the house, having a good old time. After a few days, people did come by to check on the family. Marion's boss decided to come and check on him, and, he just wanted to see just how sick he was. But Caril answered the door and told him that, you know what? He's really sick. It's probably going to be another couple days before he can even come in because, everybody has the flu. Caril's sister, Barbara, comes by, and Caril talked them, Barbara and her husband, not to coming in since everybody had the flu. Nobody wants to get sick. Now, nobody really bought that story. And in fact, Barbara's husband came by with his brother a little bit later to check out the situation. They went home, didn't feel, and that's, Charles's friend, by the way. They felt something was wrong. So they come by, and Caril once again tells the men not to come in the house because if they did, the mother's life would be on their hands. Mother's already gone, but they don't know that. So, of course, the two men, and this was a series of mistakes coming up here, the two men go straight to police. In what would be yet another fail, the police come to the house inquiring about the family. Caril was so convincing about the sickness that they had, they believed it and left. Now, Bob, still not convinced, so he reached out to one of Caril's friends and asked her to go pay a visit to see if, she could get the truth and or get inside the house. The friend would get yet another story, but this story is coming a little bit closer to the truth now. Caril would whisper to her friend that, quote, some guy is back there with Chuck. He has a Tommy gun. I think they're going to rob a bank. The friend told her father, who then called police the next day. So at this point, people are starting to catch on, but that doesn't mean anything. The grandmother then decides to come over to the house, and Grandma, you know how they are, she's angry that Caril would not let them into the house, so she went straight to the police. Again, the police go out to the Fugate home, and they take a look around, and they don't notice anything odd. Now, you have to remember, again, the family's bodies were outside rotting. So while they would look in the house, take a look around the house, they had cleaned up the mess, the crime scene. So inside the house, everything, nobody's tied up or anything. They're all out in the back in the chicken coop in the outhouse. Yet again, Bob, who was Charles's friend and dating Caril's sister, goes to police. And this time he's demanding that they do a full property search. And the police refuse. What? Yes, I know. So Guy Starkweather, Charles's dad, goes to police claiming that they needed to bring Charles in for a little chat. Now, this is his own dad saying something's wrong. Charles's own dad is saying something's wrong. You need to go get him and Caril and bring him in. Again, the police say, nope.
That's just so weird.
So when no one else would help, Bob and his brother once again go out to the house, and this time they did what police would not do. They searched the grounds and they discovered what happened to the Fugate family. Finally, the police go out to take Charles Starkweather and Caril Fugate into custody. There was no way to know that this was just part of what this devious duo had done. Knowing the authorities were on their way, Charles and Caril blew out of town. But Charles' car, it's not a very good one. It's going to break down. So Charles's car breaks down. Knowing that they have to hide out, Charles decided that they would go to an elderly friend's farm. Now, this is a family farm of the Starkweathers, right? And he knows Charles. So he goes to this guy's farm. The man is 72 years old, and his name's August Meyer. And he had known Charles since he was a young kid. The car got stuck in the mud on the way to his house. So things went badly quickly, and the truth is we'll really never know what happened. But Charles shot August in the head, claiming it was self-defense. You'll see he says that about every single person he kills. Mm-hmm. It was self-defense.
Oh, it is self-defense.
Or they got in the way. But then, here you go.
He's such a sweet man.
Then he shot August's dog, too. What did the dog do? Nothing. Guess that's self-defense, too. I doubt it. After he killed the man, took him to the outbuilding, and then Caril and Charles went to his house, where they stole some guns and money, filled their little bellies with food, and then, you ready? Fell asleep. They took a nap. Jen.
Well, it's tiring, Camille. Come on.
Guess it is tiring to go on a giant crime spree when you're 13 and 18. Well, at this point, I think she's 14 and he's 19, but I digress. Unaware of what had happened, a neighbor came to help Charles fix his car, and they were able to get the car out of the mud and back on the road. Charles wanted to check on his dead friend, and when he did, he was spooked that the blanket was no longer on the body as he had placed it. He had put a blanket over Augustus' body. So Charles, of course, because he's dumb, is thinking that something or someone was after them. So Charles, you can't make this up. Guess what? He's going to go back to the house. He needs to go back to the house. So now, once again, he gets his car stuck in the mud again. So they bailed on the vehicle and took their guns and stolen items, and then they were picked up. They were hitchhiking and got picked up by a 17-year-old named Robert Jensen and a 16-year-old named Caril King, not the singer. Soon a shotgun was at Jensen's neck, and Charles was demanding all their money. Charles forced Jensen to drive back towards Meyer's farm to get into an abandoned storm cellar. Once at the cellar, he marched the young couple into the storm cellar, where he shot Jensen in the head 6 times and Caril once in the head. Charles yanked Caril's pants down around her ankles and stabbed her in the stomach and pubic area, although there was no evidence that she had been raped. Charles, and now his girlfriend, Caril, left in Jensen's car. As they drove away, they daydreamed about escaping to Washington. And in reality, if they had done that, this story would have turned out way different. But instead, they went back to Lincoln, where everyone was now looking for them. The story was out and about. Police knew, authorities, state patrol, everybody knows what's up. But of course, Charles is nosy. I mean, which I appreciate as a fellow nosy person. But he just wants to see if Caril's family's been discovered yet. So, and they had, but he decides to go drive past their house.
That's smart. I mean, you should always return to the scene of the crime, right?
Whatever. After he saw that he went there and there was swarms of police. Oops, let's keep going. So then he drove to another part of town, and guess what they did there, Jen?
What?
Fell asleep, took another nap.
Oh.
They're the sleepingest crime couple ever.
It's hard to be on the lam.
On January 28th, 1958, the next day, Charles abandoned the car and it was found stuck in the mud, the one that he left behind. And upon closer inspection, the teens were also found dead in the cellar. Knowing that the police would be all over town looking for them, Charles had an idea. He's not very smart, but whatever. No. His idea was that they would go to a prominent part of town to the house of a man by the name of C. Lauer Ward. Now, he was the president of the Capital Bridge and Capital Steel Companies. Now, this is the Midwest, and, banking and steel is big business. When the doorbell rang, their maid, Lillian, answered the door. Charles was on the other side of the door with the gun. He demanded that their dog, Queenie, be locked up. Their other dog, Susie, was a small poodle. He wasn't afraid of Susie, and so Susie got to run about. Charles then told the maid to continue to make Clara, that's Ward's wife, food, which she did. When Clara came in the room, she stayed calm and agreed to cooperate. As all this was taking place, Caril, she goes into the library. You know what she does?
What?
Come on now. You know how the story's going. What do you think she's going to do in that library? She's sure going to read. What do you think she's going to do?
I don't know. My brain is completely dead.
Fall asleep. She takes a nap.
Gotcha. Yeah. They're tired.
They sleep. They sleep a lot.
Well, so it's tough.
When Clara Ward came into the kitchen, Charles assured her that nothing bad would happen as long as she cooperated. Clara was calm and agreed to cooperate. Charles had Caril come into the house where Mrs. Ward had fixed some coffee for her. Charles, meanwhile, decided that he wanted to see what it was like having money and helping order people around is what he wanted. That's what he wanted. He demanded that Clara make him some pancakes. Not Lillian, mind you, Clara. Clara make him some pancakes.
Clara maybe made really great pancakes when she's not sleeping.
No, not Clara. That's Caril, his girlfriend.
Oh, Caril, sorry.
Clara's the wife. Carol's still sleeping.
Well, Clara probably made great pancakes, too.
She did. So as she was doing this, he changed his mind, decided he want waffles instead. So she's like, So she's like, okay. And she complied. She made the waffles. So now it's around 1 p.m. in the afternoon when Clara asked to go and change her shoes. And Charles lets her, but she was taking too long. So Charles goes up to check on her. And guess what? He claimed, that she had a gun and tried to shoot him. So Charles then had to stab her in the neck and chest. While Charles dragged Clara's body into the bedroom, Poodle Susie started barking at him, which angered him. So he took the butt of the rifle and struck the dog and broke her neck. Broke the dog's neck. What is wrong with him?
Well, a lot. There's a lot wrong with him.
Charles Starkweather then called his father and told his father to tell Bob Van Bush that he was going to kill him for interfering with Charlie's relationship with Caril. Now, Bob is married to Caril's older sister. So Charles is just pretty much going to wipe out that whole Fugate family. That's what he wants to do. Charles then wrote a letter to police, and I'm going to read it to you exactly as how he wrote it because you can't make this up. I and Caril are sorry for what has happened because I have hurt everybody because of it, and so has Caril. But I'm saying one thing. Everybody then came out there was lucky, i.e., there, There, not dead, even Caril's sister. All of that lowercase, by the way. My favorite. But Anna saying. When the newspaper arrived, Charles was thrilled that he was featured front page. Of course he was. He told Caril, we're stars. This is so reminiscent of Natural Born Killers, is it not?
Well, isn't that one of the people that they based him off of?
Yes. Hence
That's probably why it's reminiscent.
I know. When C. Lauer Ward came home from work, Charles shot the industrialist. He would die from his wounds. Then Charles took the maid Lillian, tied her to a bed, and stabbed her to death. When Ward had failed to show up for work the next day, his boss went over to the house to see what was going on. He was greeted with 3 dead bodies, a barking dog, and another dog hiding under the bed with a broken neck. Due to the high profile of this murder, he was good friends with the governor. Ward was. The governor called out the National Guard to spread out in the streets and search for Charles and Caril. At this point, all the parents rushed to the schools to get their kids and take them home, which, of course, like, could you imagine looking outside and you see all the National Guard coming across? Heck yeah, they don't care. They'll kill anybody. And the poor dog lived with a broken neck. It's terrible. Charles and Caril stupidly thought that they could go back to Caril's house once more, but nope. Officers were there, and of course, they're still there. They're trying to figure out what to do. So instead, they decide they're going to go to Washington State, like they had thought about. As they're making their way there, they come across a traveling salesman by the name of Merle Collision. The man was sleeping in his car. They told him that they were going to take his car, but Charles shot him in the head, too. Charles would claim that Caril did this one. Later, he would claim that. As Charles was struggling to get the car moving, actually it was the emergency brake, and he didn't know how to get it off. He didn't know how to take off the emergency brake.
Well, that's
Which
hard.
is fine. My daughter didn't know either. She's 16. That's okay. So a man pulls over to help the couple, thinking that they had car trouble. As the man approached Charles told him, I just need to get this brake released. So you need to release it or you're going to be killed. Now, the man knew one of them would be dying if he didn't get that gun. So a struggle ensued. As they're fighting over the gun, William Romer, a Wyoming deputy sheriff, stopped to see what was going on. This would be so scary to come across all this. Immediately, Caril jumps out of the back seat and she runs up to the deputy. "Take me to the police," she cried. "Well, I'm the deputy sheriff." "He's killed a man," she blurted out, crying and pointing to the car. Do you see what she's doing now?
Mm-hmm.
Charles had made a run to the Packard, the car, and he was driving back towards the town of Douglas. The officer ordered a roadblock and began his pursuit. The car chase would reach miles in excess of 100 miles per hour. That's pretty good for back then. Suddenly, Charles Starkweather came to an abrupt halt right in the middle of the highway. Officers told him to get out with his hands up, but of course he doesn't follow instructions. So an officer shot at his feet, prompting him to not get on the ground, but instead start tucking in his shirt. What? He was shot at again, and he finally got on the ground. So they're telling him to get on the ground, and instead he's tucking in a shirt.
Yeah.
Which, wants to look good, I guess. But of course, they're going to think he's going for a gun.
I would think so. Seriously.
So to speak to this kind of person, Charles, you wonder why he stopped. You wonder, did he finally have enough? Was enough enough? Did he know? Whatever. No. Do you want to know why he stopped? You just can't make this up. I'm not kidding. Charles stopped dead on the highway, Jen, because he was scared he was going to bleed to death. You see, his ear was bleeding from a cut that he sustained in some glass, but he had thought he had been shot, and he did not want to bleed to death.
Yeah.
So this guy shoots everyone he meets, but then he stops the police chase because he fears he's going to die from severe blood loss.
And that tracks. I mean, come on.
It sure does.
Out of all the killers that we know, that kind of...
Both Charles and Caril were charged with first-degree murder and murder while committing a robbery, which, as we know, is, good for death. Both were being tried as adults, even though Caril was only 14 years old. Both could be sentenced to death via the electric chair. The prosecution chose to prosecute the murder of Robert Jensen. So, as is the case, a lot of times they only choose to prosecute the one that they have the most, evidence for. Charles Starkweather stood trial on May 5th, 1958. His defense attorneys entered a plea of innocent by reason of insanity. To Charles, this was way worse than being a killer. He would rather be known as a killer than insane, which I don't even know what to say about that either. Caril would claim she was held hostage and forced to go along with Charles all this time. She would say she feared for her life and that he would kill her family if she didn't do it, but he already killed her family. But okay. So at first, Charles would tell investigators, "Don't be rough on the girl. She didn't have anything to do with it." But that little tune he was singing changed when he realized that she was claiming she was a hostage. She didn't have anything to do with it, and he made her. So then he's like, "I don't think so. She did a few of these murders. I didn't do all of them. But you know what she did do? She did all of the mutilations." That he often left her alone in the car or even in the house as he went to get food. So he left her alone plenty of times. He left her alone in the car when he'd run errands to go inside to get food, and the guns were in the car with her. she could have totally escaped. Clement Gauguin, Charles's defense attorney, made a very emotional plea. This boy is a product of our society that spawned this individual is looking for a scapegoat. Caril Fugate should get the same punishment as this lad, and I can tell you right now that she is never going to get the death penalty. His life, my life, are almost parallels until our 19th birthday. I stand here and weep unashamedly. I hated everybody and everything, and I could lick anybody. Society treated me exactly as they treated Charles Starkweather. But the good Lord gave me possibly a little better parents. I will take you to the death house so you can see him, with his trousers cut up to his knees, with his arms bare, his head shaved, with electrodes attached. And when the switch is pulled, you will see the electricity snap and smoke come from his head. His hair will stand on end as the electricity goes through his body. You will see him jerk in the straps and see him fall forward. This is your responsibility, not mine. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you for the life of Charles Starkweather. Pretty good speech. However, the plea did not work. Charles was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to die. Then Caril, the helpless hostage, that was her. That's what she was going in on. That plea didn't work for her either. Caril was found guilty of murder as well. Since she was only 14 years old, she received a life sentence instead of the electric chair. She was sent to the Nebraska Center for Women, where she served her sentence until her parole in June of 1976. Caril Fugate is still alive today, but goes by a different last name, and nobody really knows where she is.
Yeah.
And that is the story of Charles and Caril. Charles Starkweather and Caril Fugate. So there you go. But yes, that's the story. That's day 11. Not the nicest people. I think she was young and dumb and all that, but
I do. I think she would have done whatever anybody would have told her to. If she wouldn't have met Charles, she would have not done what she did.
It was interesting because all the photos that we see of them, this is just a little side note, because I didn't know. In all the photos, they're obviously black and white, so I always assumed he had slicked back, brown hair, slicked back blonde hair. No, he was a big-time redhead, and I never knew that.
Yep, I did. When I first worked at the book wholesaler place, the Charles Starkweather book that had just come out, one of the big books. And so all of the stuff was about him was plastered all over the place that I worked. So,
yep. So there you go. It's, I don't know. I think he wanted to be famous and go down somehow, so that's what he chose to do.
Yeah, but why would you choose that, of all things? I mean, I don't know. I guess it was easier for him to be that instead of trying harder to be... Well, and I think he wanted to be
something, and he just wasn't going to be anything. I don't know.
Well, I want to be something, and I think the easiest thing to do would be to kill people.
Mass murder.
Right?
Spree killer. Yep. There you go. So, I think it's interesting that she's... And as far as what I could find, she's not dead. But
if nobody knows who she is or where she is, she could be.
If you're out there, Caril, give us a call. That would be amazing. How old would she be
now?
I don't know. I don't do math. I don't know. I don't know. Figure that out. Somebody else tell us. But anyway, that is day 11, Jen.
Thank you. One more day.
Can't wait for you to take us out.
Day. Yep.
Woo-hoo.
Take us out in the nicest way, you mean.
You know what I mean. Take us out. Take us into the holiday day. The big one. The big day for,
Christmas Eve.
Celebrate.
With everybody's... Yep.
All right. That's it. That's all I got. So remember, until tomorrow, lock your doors.
And keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya.
Today's episode was researched and written by me, Cam. For more information about this episode, as well as all the sources I used, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by hosts Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from October Pod VHS. Our True Crime Podcast is executive produced by Nico Vertesi and Dick Vane. Make sure to like and subscribe to Our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter at Our True Crime Pod. You can email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. If you really like the show, make sure to check out our Patreon at Our True Crime Podcast. Our True Crime Podcast is an OTC production.